Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Ryan Prunzinski of Christ Lutheran Church in Michigan Center, Michigan, and this is my Chair Chat Daily Devotional for Thursday, May 14, 2020. Peace be with you. These Chair Chat Daily Devotions are intended to help you engage your life of faith during this time of pandemic. And so with that in mind, I encourage you all to take time throughout these videos to pause and reflect, to journal, to have conversation with those around you. And as always, as I've said in the other videos, I highly encourage you to leave constructive comments, questions, or prayer requests in the comments section below the video, and I promise to get to those in the following videos. The readings that get selected each time in these videos come from the Daily Revised Common Lectionary, which is a church calendar reading schedule, and it can be found online. The readings for today are as follows: Psalm 66, verses 8 through 20, Genesis 6, verses 5 through 22, and Acts 27, verses 1 through 12. These readings are listed in the description below. Before I get to the readings themselves, as always, I'd like to invite any one of you out there that watches this to join us at Christ Lutheran Church for worship. We Facebook Live our worship services, which take place at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you can join us live on our Facebook page. The link to these videos is in the description below. And even if you can't make it live and watch the live stream, once the live stream is over, it gets recorded and posted on our Facebook page. So you can always watch these services after the fact. Please come and join us. Hear a good word, and I hope to be inspired and know that God is with you. All right. With that in mind, we move on to the first reading, which comes from Psalm 66, verses 8 through 20, which reads as follows: Bless our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard, who has kept us among the living and has not let our feet slip. For you, God, have tested us. You have tried us as silver is tried. You brought us into the net. You laid burdens on our backs. You let people ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water. Yet you have brought us out to a spacious place. I will come into your house with burnt offerings. I will pay you my vows. Those that my lips uttered and my mouth promised when I was in trouble. I will offer to you burnt offerings of fatlings with the smoke of the sacrifice of rams. I will make an offering of bulls and goats. Come and hear, all of you who fear God, and I will tell you all that he has done for me. I cried aloud to him, and he was extolled with my tongue. If I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But truly, God has listened. He has given heed to the words of my prayer. Blessed be God, because he has not rejected my prayer or removed his steadfast love from me. Here ends the reading. As I finish reading the psalm, I can't help but think to myself, we are living in trying times, are we not? We are feeling the weight of this moment like a burden on our shoulders, are we not? No, there may not be any fire or water that we have had to walk through, again, like Meshach, Rashach, and Abednego in Daniel, or like the Israelites in the Exodus. But indeed, these are trying times we live in. So I hope you can easily resonate with the verse, quote, For you, O God, have tested us, for you have tried us as silver is tried. Now I want to be clear that I am not saying that God has inflicted us with COVID-19. I am not making that claim, for I am not God and I do not know this. I am simply saying that we are in trying times, and God is with us during this time of trial. And that God is with us, seemingly trying to refine us and our lives during this time of trial, to strengthen us, to make us better, right? Because just think about all that we've been able to accomplish so far during this time of pandemic. Telemedicine, right, which is awesome. Zoom conference meetings, so that people don't have to travel as far and waste as much energy and resources in order to meet, and can also stay safe, which is good. Online worship. The good news is being heard by hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of more people than we would normally get collectively in our nation on a Sunday. That is good news. Grocery delivery. How great that is. That's a new job when people need them. It's also helping keep people safe. It's also helping people who it might be hard for them to get to the store because maybe they're having to watch their kids more now and it's hard to bring them to the store or whatever. They're homebound. That's a great thing. There's widespread social distancing. As my friend Ben said in the one sermon we did on God's abundance a couple of weeks ago, how miraculous is it that there are not enough law enforcement people in our nation or even in the world to beat people into submission, into social distancing. Rather, people out of the goodness of their own heart and for the love of their neighbor, out of a desire to be hospitable and create safe space for others around them, are doing all this social distancing. The vast majority of people are. That's miraculous, right? And there's neighbors mowing each other's lawns, right? As others are unable to do it because maybe there isn't a lawn service. They're picking up their neighbor's medicine. Their teachers are doing drive-bys, right, to their students to encourage them and say hello since they can't see them in the classroom. Microbreweries. I love this because I love beer, right? Microbreweries are doing their part. As their restaurants might be closed down, they're ramping up their distilleries to make hand sanitizer for their local region so that people can stay safe. We have accomplished so much. God has done so much through God's people during this time of pandemic. Oh, I haven't even finished yet. Small groups of quilters are making probably hundreds of thousands of cloth masks for people that need them. I know our own people in Christ Lutheran Church have made, just one example, 200 masks to go to our local Jackson County Medical Care Facility who needed them. And I think they also made masks for the interfaith shelter in town too. How amazing is that, right? God is good. And these are people, some of them, that, these masks are being sent around the country too. I know that I heard a segment on Governor Andrew Cuomo say that they're getting masks from people all around the country to give to their frontline workers. It's amazing. And so much more is being done that we'll probably never see or hear about. That's taking place right now. So yes, again, we are in trying times. Nearly 80,000 people have died. Lots of people are out of work, millions of people. And so our words right now might very well be something like, for you, O God, have tested us or are testing us. You have tried us like silver is tried. We are feeling the heat and the pressure of the moment. But my hope for you all would be that your story, your words could end, or at least include in your story, like the psalmist today, these words, quote, "Come and hear. Come and hear, all you who fear God, and I will tell you what God has done for me." Think about that. Many people already struggle to talk about what God means to them, what Jesus means to them, to actually talk about their faith. And no, I don't mean try and convert people. I mean simply talking about their love of God and what God means to them. Right? We already struggle with that, simply talking about God's goodness and when things are good. But to talk about God in the midst of struggle and trying times, right, that can seem even more difficult, if not impossible, if not crazy. right? It might in fact seem strange to talk about God during trying times at first glance, at first blush. But is it really that strange? Or might that type of storytelling during the struggle, during the trial, be exactly what the people around us and in the world need right now? Especially since we are promised today that this is how God operates. Right? God is not simply with us during the good times. Right? God is with us in the trial, refining us and bringing us to, I think the quote was, a spacious place. Right? And so think about it. Most people who struggle to trust God, to trust in a transcendent God, that is a God who is actually with them, acting in their lives, struggle with this type of faith and trusting in God because they say, how could a loving God let X, Y, Z happen in my life? It's usually something hard or trying. In other words, they never hear. They probably never hear what God has done for good amidst the trying times. All they hear is the negative. All they hear is the bad. All they see is the bad. And so no wonder people go, how could a loving God be present in my life if all I can see and all I hear is the bad? The tragedy alone for these people, the tragedy alone tells the tale, while the voice of God in God's people remains silent. And that's a real tragedy. So our promise today is that during the trial, God is refining and blessing us. Bringing us to a, quote again, spacious place, a broad place. Beside still waters, the 23rd Psalm would say, to a bounty, a banquet, a table prepared before us, in front of the hardness and the harshness, our enemies, while our cup is overflowing, right? So our response that we are called to today, because of this blessedness that God is refining in us, and this broad place that God is bringing us to, is this, quote, come and hear, all of you who fear God, and I will tell you what God has done for me. So what has God done for you lately? Given you hope, peace, joy, encouraged you or shown you love through the Word, through people around you, through song. However, what has God done for you lately? And how can you tell others what God has done for you amidst the struggle, amidst the trying times that we live in right now and will for some time to come? All right, on to Genesis 6, verses 5 through 22, which reads as follows. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continuously. The thoughts of their hearts was only evil continuously. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and the birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. These are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with all the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above. And put the door of the ark in its side, make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I am going to bring a flood of waters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing, of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come in to you, to keep them alive. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Here ends the reading. So we have the very familiar story of Noah. This is like probably one of the most familiar stories in the Bible. And quite frankly, it is packed full of theological quagmires and questions, and I just do not have the time to try and cover all of that in this video. And this is a very challenging story. Let me just say bluntly that I understand that, I acknowledge that. Like the fact that God destroys much of creation in the story. That is a very hard thing. And let me say this, I mean, I haven't looked, but I'm very confident, being someone who's gone to seminary and done a lot of reading, that there are probably a lot of good books written about the story of Noah by a lot of very faithful and thoughtful scholars. And so if you are curious about this story and all these quagmires and questions of the character of God and what all this death means theologically, I promise you that I will help you find the resources. I just don't have the space to do it in this video. So please hear me again when I say that this story is a tough story. And if you struggle with who God is based on this story, I get that. I get that. But I also want to encourage you that, the Bible is a collection of stories, and that the character of God continues to be revealed more and more throughout the Bible as we get closer and closer to our current time in history. And that in Jesus, we see most clearly and most fully who God really is. And so everything in terms of who we understand God to be should always be grounded first and foremost in who Jesus Christ is. And so please do not get hung up simply on Noah. Yes, ask questions. Yes, be challenged. Yes, be stretched. But please keep the whole of the Bible in mind, especially Jesus at its center, as you think about who God is, at least from the Christian perspective. All right. And so I'm going to focus on the hope and the good news from this story, and the challenges are going to have to be for another time and space. So this is the first thing I want you to consider out of this story. 1, God keeps God's promises. This is very important from this story, because it's in this story that we have the very first promise, the very first covenant. That's what a covenant is. It's a promise that God makes with all of creation. Right? That happens in Genesis 9. At the end of the story, God says that never again will the earth be flooded and destroyed. And the rainbow is a sign of this eternal covenant aimed at life. Truly, the story of Noah ends with God's desire to be that life will be preserved and that the flood will never destroy creation again. Okay? And so as the rain falls today, at least here by me in Michigan, and we are not being utterly destroyed by it, I, and I hope you, are reminded as you listen to the rain fall and hear the thunder crack as I did this morning. God keeps God's promises. We have, in fact, not been utterly destroyed by the flood again. All right, the other point I would have you take away from this story is this. Even from the very beginning, right, because Genesis is the very beginning of all the storytelling of God and God revealing God's self to us. From the very beginning, our God is a God of death and resurrection, even before Jesus in the flesh comes. Because from death and loss, right, the flood, comes new life, and new life that lasts. If we take the story to be, even if it's not literal and is metaphorical, right, our existence as creation is still here, and it is abundant. We have multiplied, right? We have been fruitful and multiplied from even earlier in Genesis. And there's been a lot of death and loss along the way. But the story tells us that God's character is one that brings new life from death and loss. So, as we are here in our own 40 days, right, because that's how long Noah and his family and the animals were in the ark, right? I say so 40 days, right? We're locked up in our arks, right, in our confined spaces of quarantine, waiting for this flood of pandemic and disease to recede, and get back to life as normal, as I'm sure Noah and his family and all the animals were looking forward to as well. We have the hope from this story of knowing that God is in control and desires to not utterly destroy us, but to bring us back to a place of new life. If God seriously desired to utterly destroy us, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have a story where people survived, right? God desires to not utterly destroy us, but to bring us back to a place of new life, even as we face much death and loss around us. We see this ultimate truth of God's desire for life and lasting life, everlasting life for all, being brought to its pinnacle, embodied in the person of Jesus, the face of God in the flesh, right? But I just want to remind you all, because I'm trying to stick within the story itself, this truth and character of God, right, to bring about life from loss, new life from loss, and lasting life from loss exists within the story of Noah and in Genesis itself. The rainbow becomes the symbol of that desire and promise. Now, since I like to get you to reflect on some things, during these hard times, right, we can feel like we're hungry, and I don't just mean that physically, but we're at a loss. We're not quite satiated spiritually, emotionally, etc. At the end of the story, I found it pretty comforting that God reminds Noah and his family, right, that they will need food to sustain themselves during these trying times as they're stuck in this boat, right, waiting. And so I wonder, how have your spirits and your bodies stayed fed and nourished during this time of isolation and waiting? How have your spirits and bodies stayed fed? What are you doing to feed yourself? And I don't just mean actual food, like fruits and vegetables and meats and such. What are you doing to stay nourished? And if you're not doing that well, I would have you pause and reflect today on what steps you could take to nourish yourself, to take care of yourself. What does that look like? How can you do that? If I'm your pastor, how can I, as your pastor, help you do that? And seriously, I say this, God bless you as you do. All right, on to Acts chapter 27, verses 1 through 12. When it was decided that we were to sail for Italy, they transferred Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. Embarking on a ship of Adramyttium, that was about to set sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly, and allowed him to go to his friends to be cared for. Putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. After we had sailed across the sea that is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship bound for Italy, and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days, and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind was against us, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Sailing past it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. Since much time had been lost, and sailing was now dangerous, because even the fast had already gone by, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I cannot see that the voyage will be with danger, I can see that the voyage will be with danger and much heavy loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. Since the harbor was not suitable for spending the winter, the majority was in favor of putting to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, where they could spend the winter. It was a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest. Now this is where the story ends, and it was like, oh, come on. I mean, I've read it before because I took Acts course in seminary, and so I kind of already knew what was going to happen. But I'm going to read two more verses. I believe it's 20 and 21, just to kind of give you the conclusion to what happens, right? So Paul's like, guys, it's almost winter. We've already been struggling. We're way behind schedule. There's going to be a huge loss of property and life if we just press forward, right? And the voices that are listened to are the captain and the owner of the ship. That is, those who are trying to make the most money, right? That's implicitly implied. So this is these are one of the two verses after what we've read today. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days. In other words, it was stormin', baby. And no small tempest rage. That is to say, it was stormin', baby. All hope of being saved was at last abandoned. And the way this builds up to this is like, first they started throwing cargo, then they started throwing gear, and then they're like, we're just throwing out hope at this point. And since they had been without food, so now they're starving for a long time, Paul then stood up among them and said, Men, you should have listened to me. You should have listened to me and have not set sail from Crete, and thereby avoided all of this damage and loss. All right, so, yeah, that's also part of this story that you don't get to hear. And so why I bring that up is because yesterday in the video we talked about making wise choices, right? Wise choices, not based on profitability alone. And here again we see how when the owner of the boat and the captain, the ones who would either lose or make the most amount of money, depending upon the decisions that are made, are the ones that are listened to and decide to sail on, even though it wasn't safe. And they knew this, right? Because think about it, Paul is not the sailor. I mean, he does a lot of traveling, right? But he is not the sailor, and even he can read the signs and says, we are in danger, right? So they knew it wasn't safe, and since they go based on their desire to make more money, there is serious damage and loss. They run out of everything. All that's left on the boat is basically themselves. I mean, they literally lost everything except their lives. Now, of course, in the story itself, because I'm implying, right, this isn't directly stated, what I've just said, The direct words are this. This is the other factor, the factor that is given, that they decide to leave, is that the harbor was not suitable for spending the winter in. But that's a very ambiguous statement. What does that even mean? Right? Is it not suitable because they won't be able to make a profit if they stay in the harbor all winter? You know? Is there certain cargo on there that they can't sell where they're at? Will it be too hard to get the ship out in the spring? Will they lose too much time? And we have no idea what the harbor not being suitable means. And so my implications are just as valid as pretty much anybody else's. Either way, what we do see in the story is that wisdom and safety do not seem to be the driving force in the decision making, right? Or the wisdom of safety and keeping people safe does not seem to be the driving factor. It's more about schedule and inconvenience at the very least. And in the end, not listening to wisdom that's focused on safety costs them dearly. And so with that in mind, right, I reiterate, as we get ready to kind of transition in our way of living and being from being shut in place completely, please, please, please make wise decisions and think about others, right? And others' well-being more than yourself as you do. Because the situation that we are currently in is not an individualistic situation. It is a communal one. The decisions that you make today might cause death for somebody around the world tomorrow. Here's my metaphor, or analogy rather, like people on a ship in a storm, like in the story, we are all in this together. All right, I'll get away from that point. I was a safety supervisor in the military. Safety is really important to me. The other point is this. We see again how God brings God's faithful through a storm, right? And here we are in our own storm of pandemic and disease. And this is the even greater point, right? Because the captain and the owner of the ship are the leaders, right? The formal leaders. Even when the leaders in the story, in charge, make very poor decisions, as they do, spoiler alert, right? Paul makes it to Rome, where the ship is trying to get. It says Italy, but Paul's final destination is Rome. That's where he's being brought. And so even when the leaders in charge make poor decisions, God's faithful, Paul, gets to where he needs to be. So as we live in times where many people, if you don't know this, turn on the news. Many people are skeptical of leadership's decisions right now. We have a beautiful promise in the story today in Acts that God brings God's faithful through the storm, even as poor decisions are being made. Right? That's not an excuse to make poor decisions. It is simply a statement of promise and hope that God can see us through even as poor decisions are being made. Thanks be to God. I hope that this promise embedded in this story today gives you hope as it's given me hope today. I saw that, I wrote that down in my notes, and I'm like, thank you, God, because it just feels like that, I just need that right now, because there are so many people that seem to be making some pretty terrible decisions. So as I listen to the raindrops continue to fall, and I do, I trust that God will see you and I through. If you remember nothing else from this video, we are shown today that through the storm, God will see us through, because God keeps God's promises, and God's promise is to bring you to a broad place and a place of life. With that being said, I will talk to you tomorrow.